And the interesting thing about these is that at the site itself, they found a cache of something like 40 or 50,000 of these magnetite beads, which look exactly like these. Because they're magnetite, they have qualities which can affect your brain chemistry and your pineal gland. And it's thought now this is part of the reason they were working with this particular technology. One of the most interesting aspects here is the fact that at San Lorenzo, they found an iron ore magnet, possibly the earliest magnet in the world. When you hang a needle on it, it was actually used like a proper compass. The Chinese didn't even invent this type of magnet till hundreds of years later. So where did it really come from? Was it the Olmec? So this talk is called Olmec Origins, the Mystery of Mexico's Megalith Builders. And today we're going to be looking into the pre-Mayan world of ancient Central America. A place called Lecapota. This is the largest Olmec head. This is up to about 40 tons, and it was the last one ever made, apparently, and it's just a few hundred years BC. It's on display at Santiago Tuxtla, the local town to Tres Zapotes, and in the museum in Santiago Tuxtla we have these very interesting stone carvings. And this is quite long. This is like 6 or 7 feet long, and that would be slipped into the base of the pyramid, either side of the steps leading up to the main platform. And you can see clearly these are not local people's features. These were clearly stated in the early writings of Matthew Stirling and others that they look very West African, especially with the type of hairstyle as well. This is the close-up of the Rancho Capata head, the 40-ton one. It's the only one with the eyes closed as well. This is another one from Tres Zapotes. You can see this beautiful features, beautiful carving, some of the most intricate carving. It's been compared to the quality of ancient Egypt. The interesting thing about this one, on the back of it, we have 7 braids coming down, which certain researchers, including Ivan van Sertima, believes are proof that this was from African origin. Again, this is the Lecapota head, an illustration of it just to get a sense of the quality of the stonework. We have this kind of grimacing mouth, which is a feature we find on many of the Olmec sculptures. Just to prove how good they were at stonework, these are some 3D relief shells carved on a piece of andesite. Now this is an unusual, there's not much of this around in Mexico, so this is extremely hard rock, similar, very similar in constitution to what we find at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku in Peru, Bolivia area. But if we look at some other sites around the area, especially San Lorenzo, we've got Tres Zapotes here, we've got San Lorenzo here. We'll have a look at this site now, because this is the oldest, probably the first site that was being used and utilized by the Olmecs. And again, incredibly difficult to get to, go through rivers and swamps, but they found this amazing colossal head. And many of these heads were deliberately buried, and it was really not until 1945 that it was properly started to be excavated. But you know, even while they were there, locals were taking many artifacts and valuables away. But look at the quality of the workmanship there. And these were all originally upright at specific places in the temple, often like protecting the temple as such. You can go and see the site now. A 10th head, there was 9 discovered there until 1994 when a 10th colossal head was found, this one here. And by a magnetometer survey, and it was the archaeologist Anne Cyphers who actually uncovered this at the site. Interesting thing about this, the headdress is formed of 92 circular beads that completely cover the upper part of the head. There's ear spools, it looks like an older gentleman because the sagging cheeks and lines under the eyes, but a very pronounced chin, which is quite different to some of the other Olmec colossal heads. And the interesting thing about these is that at the site itself, they found a cache of something like 40 or 50,000 of these magnetite beads, which look exactly like these. Because they're magnetite, they have qualities which can affect your brain chemistry and your pineal gland. And it's thought now this is part of the reason they were working with this particular technology. You can see some of the scoop marks on the rock here. It's one of the rocks at the San Lorenzo Museum. The site's just further down this road. You're not supposed to go there, but we do. This is some of the stones that were unearthed at San Lorenzo. We've got this beautiful bird motif with the heads missing. We've got this sort of figure laying over the stone, beautiful relief carving. And we have these spheres that were carved, not dissimilar to other ones we find in other parts of Central America. So sluice gates were controlled the fast water flow around these pyramid structures. And there was over 100 tons of basalt were used to create these particular things. In the museum there you can see piles of these stones. And so what they were doing, they were moving water and it would charge up, it would generate electric charge and magnetism and so forth. And you place your seeds there, your grains, it would charge them up. You go and plant them. This was tested by John Burke. You actually get an increased yield of crop and larger crops as well. So this was quite remarkable because it's very similar to what we find at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku in Bolivia, the same technology. So there are suggestions there were connections between Central and South America. One of the most interesting aspects here is the fact that at San Lorenzo they found an iron ore magnet, possibly the earliest magnet in the world. And there's also very strong magnetic fluctuations at the site itself, like it was chosen deliberately because it was on top of a magnetic anomaly. And we know there are connections, as we'll see shortly, with the Chinese and the Olmec. And so we have to kind of take this quite seriously. I mean, it's only quite a small bar, it's only like this big, but it was part of a larger bar of magnetite. It had been polished, it had a groove running down the middle, and it was thought to be, you know, compared when you hang a needle on it, it was actually used like a proper compass. And one of the other interesting things about this is that the Chinese didn't even invent this type of magnet till hundreds of years later. So where did it really come from? Was it the Olmec? We also find that some other sites, this is just an example we're going to look at a little bit later, down in southern Guatemala, a place called La Democracia. It was originally from a site called Monte Alto. These are like Buddha Olmec figures. You know, these are my photos. I went there and you can just sit around them in the park there. But on the right hand side of the temple here is where the magnetic strength is in the rock. And this has been found in the other Olmec heads as well, like the magnetic hotspot. Like it's part of, they understood how your brain got affected by magnets by wearing the magnet helmet. And they would actually mark it and hide that invisibly within the stone structures they were even building. It's quite remarkable. So this is San Lorenzo. This is actually the Monument 1, the first one that was discovered. And it's now in Jalapa Museum, 1200 to 900 BC. This is Monument 2, Head 2, and I just wanted to try and do a comparison with my face to see how similar we look. But notice some of the features as we go through this. I'm not going to describe too much, but you can see the earpieces, you can see the way the head is flattened, and the kind of helmets they're wearing. They're all similar, but each of them has an individual face on them. They're all individuals. You have these feathers coming down the back. We have cut marks in this one here, which is unusual. Again, you can see the different features here. Again, this is in Jalapa Museum. This is when it was first discovered. Monument 5, again in the Jalapa Museum. Monument 6, Head 6. This is quite an intriguing one because it's got these features up on top here, which people have suggested could have some kind of meaning. This is actually now in Mexico Anthropology Museum in Mexico City. Head 7, this is at Jalapa Museum. It's very battered and worn. This is one of the better preserved ones. And you can just see the features here are quite remarkable, the way they've done this. It's got these strange feathers on the hat as well. And this one is in Jalapa Museum as well. Sort of slightly smiling, almost smiling. And this is the most recently discovered one in 1994. It's actually in San Lorenzo itself with these magnetite beads covering the whole head, including going below the ear. So it's almost like some kind of magnetic helmet. This is Monument 3. It's almost 2 meters tall or 6.5 feet high. And it was moved to Villahermosa like all the other heads from La Venta. The radiocarbon dating of where it was discovered is around 1000 BC. It's got severe damage through weathering, but it's got the common expressions of the Olmec head. This one, Monument 4, this was actually discovered by Matthew Sterling in 1939. And this is an absolutely intriguing one. This is the one that people have compared to the face of the Sphinx. And this is a very interesting piece. These altars or thrones really get me, because these were made into Olmec heads later. And you've got this shaman figure, he's holding something down here. He's holding his foot there, but he's got this I thought was a serpent, but you have 4 serpents coming in here. You have other serpents up here as well. You have crosses, which are a representation of Quetzalcoatl, who we'll talk about later. But around the side here, we have a female figure, like a goddess figure, whose arm becomes a serpent and comes round the base here. So it's very shamanic, very psychedelic even, imagery carved into this massive block of basalt. And this is the actual stone. I had a very powerful experience here when I went here in 2009 with my good friend Ivan Orozco. And we went around the site at Leventa Park rather, at Villa Hermosa, and we touched every stone. Wanted to get a sense of the energies and what these stones, you know, is any something going on here. But when we reached this one, we had the strangest experience where we felt a force field of energy around this particular stone. You could walk in and out of it, and we both had it. We were both absolutely convinced there was some kind of energy field that had been activated or something. So that really blew my mind. It made me realize there's something really special going on with these Olmec shamans, whoever they were. We have the famous monument 19, I believe, at Leventa. This is a huge serpent with plumes, like feathers, surrounding this figure with some kind of headgear on, with something like a breathing apparatus holding one of these so-called man bags, unless it's some kind of device. We have the crosses here, which represent Quetzalcoatl, and many other features going on here. Now, this is very, very unusual. And this could be the first or the earliest representation of the plumed serpent or Quetzalcoatl. And this was found at Leventa. It's now on display at the Mexico National Museum of Anthropology. If we zoom in a bit, we can see this strangeness going on around his lips, like something's attached to him there. We have what looks like a helmet. It could be a fake beard. This is very intriguing. This is found all over the world. Jim features that in some of his lectures. But it's absolutely strange. I mean, obviously we find these so-called bags that people are carrying around the world in different sites. It's Göbekli Tepe, possibly, Sumeria, obviously the Olmec. But these are interesting because these come from northwest Africa. Now, these are the features that Ivan van Sertima, the facial features, he believed were linked with the Olmec. So the fact we're finding the same kind of imagery here as here is quite intriguing. We also have Egyptians connections, which something that J.J. Ainsworth pointed out when me and her went to, we've been to both these sites. This is the Temple of Isis in Egypt. This is the god Hapi, and he's encircled by a flying serpent, and he's holding things in his hand, very similar to what we find at Leventa, almost identical, in fact. So this is very, very strange. So we're seeing what Ivan van Sertima said 30, 40 years ago, that indeed there are direct connections between these two great ancient cultures. And this is more evidence of worldwide travel. We have this Sumerian or Phoenician looking gentleman called the Traveller or the Ambassador. It's monument number 13 at Leventa. We have these unusual glyphs. No one's been able to decipher these. That one looks like a bird head, but it's got these strange upturned pointed shoes with a scythe or a flag, and this headdress, which is remarkably similar to images that have been seen in Carthage and Byblos in Lebanon and other places, suggesting a Canaanite or Phoenician connection between these great ancient cultures.
Okay, here we are at Easter Island. And what you can see from this picture is you obviously see two different construction styles. The stones on the right-hand side are basalt, and they tightly fit together. And on the left-hand side, you basically have rubble as fill. As you can see from this slide, you see almost perfect cutting and fitting of stone. Again, this is not something that the Polynesian people could have done, because the only technology they had was stone upon stone. So this hints that there was once lost ancient high technology involved in constructions on Easter Island. And then we have this wall at a location called Vinapu, and this stone is basalt. So it is 7 out of 10 on the hardness scale, with diamond being 10. And there are no basalt quarries located on the island, but there are underwater off the coast. So who was swimming around underwater cutting big blocks of stone like this, moving it onto the land, and then constructing this wall? It's more likely, as we know from previous videos, that 12,000 years ago, the oceans of the world were 300 feet or 100 meters lower than they are today. And so the basalt quarry would have been exposed at that time. And if this is the case, then this wall could be 12,000 years old, made 11,000 years before the Polynesians ever existed on this little island. Again, you see the detail. This is incredible precision, very similar to what we find in places like Peru and Bolivia and ancient Egypt and other locations. And once again, it shows that there were two distinct civilizations. Standard academics say only the Polynesians lived here, but we see that advanced people were here long, long before them. And once again, look at the level of precision of the surfaces and the joinery. And here, even polygonal shapes similar to what we see in the highlands of Peru at Cusco. Three-dimensional shapes interlocking with each other. And once again, this is also at Vinapu. This is basalt stone, very hard, and the stones fit together almost perfectly, but a very high level of technical prowess. And even when we look on the corner, we can see here it's three-dimensional interlocking of stone. Below, we see basically rubble, and on the left-hand side, more rubble. So you have this crossover. It's like the same thing we find again in other locations like Peru, Bolivia, Egypt, Lebanon, etc. You have the technology that we think of in terms of the famous cultures of the areas, and then you have anomalies, and especially in a photo like this one. This is one of the Moai figures on the left, made out of volcanic tuff, and on the right, the harder basalt construction that's almost perfect. So there's a tendency that the famous cultures we know of, such as the Polynesian Easter Island people, they found the island and they found out that somebody had been there before them, somebody who had made incredible structures and things. And out of reverence, they would build their own ceremonial site in the same location. We find that in Peru, the Inca people found the city of Cusco about 1,000 years ago in ruins. It was a megalithic city made of up to 1 million tons of basalt stone. But something had destroyed the city. And so out of reverence, they decided to build their ceremonial places in the same location, either on the side or on top. So in the case of this photograph, you see one of the Moai figures on the left, very close to the older megalithic wall. And the same is the case in locations such as Machu Picchu, the famous Inca construction. 5% of Machu Picchu was found by the Inca, megalithic in nature, and then they built their ceremonial city around the work of a far more advanced people. There are even sculptures that portray people with beards and mustaches. And so Polynesian people, if they're pure-blooded Polynesian, the same thing in South America, the native people, they tend to have zero facial hair. So this could indicate that there were people living on Easter Island in the distant past that had facial hair, and that indicates that they were not Polynesian whatsoever, but came from a different location. There is also a large crater lake located on Easter Island, And in this crater lake, we find Totora reed, which is a reed used for making boats and roofs and things like that. It's quite light, quite spongy, quite waterproof. And another location where we find this Totora reed is on the coast of Peru. So what I'm hinting at is that the Totora reed might have been brought by ancient Peruvian people to Easter Island before the time of the Polynesians' arrival. A very useful plant. If you had people moving back and forth from the coast of Peru, where Totora reed is very abundant, to a place like Easter Island, not as a destination but as a transit point, then it does make sense to plant some of this reed in the lake so that as you're transiting from the coast of Peru to Easter Island, then perhaps to Tahiti, Hawaii, and beyond, if you had to repair your boats on your way back to Peru, your material was located right there on Easter Island. We also have other relationships that we're starting to figure out in terms of when Van Roggeveen, who was the Dutch explorer, who was the first European to land on Easter Island, his observation of the people was, he said, I saw dark-skinned people, I saw light-skinned people, I saw black-haired people, I saw red-haired people, and I saw blonde-haired people. Now, this does not describe the basic attributes of Polynesians. Pure-blooded Polynesians have a very strong tendency of having dark skin and black hair. And so this tells us that Easter Island was a place where different cultures visited throughout the centuries and, in fact, millennia. And quite a crude carving, once again done in the Polynesian style. If you had basalt tools, like chisels and hammers, you could create that shape out of a softer volcanic tough stone. Technically not very difficult whatsoever. But then this is where we enter the anomalies. Here in the Great Quarry on Easter Island, it's kind of hard to see, but if you look in the lower area, you'll see a face looking upwards in that recessed area, and that is a stone figure that would be about 40 feet tall. So compared to what we've seen before, the work by the Polynesian people, this is on quite an amazing scale, carving straight out of the bedrock to create giant stone figures. So I don't think that you can say that the work we've seen before and the work we're looking at now was done by the same people, and especially by the fact that more than 900 of them were created from a time period of about 1000 AD to somewhere in the region of 1750 AD. And they're so numerous. Almost every single one of them faces inland, which is quite curious. And the local people say that they were made as guardians and that each one represents an ancient chief of Easter Island. And by the way, the traditional name is Rapa Nui, which means Big Rapa. And I don't think that's a reference to the size of the island now, but knowledge of the fact that in distant times, the island was much bigger when the ocean level was 300 feet below. And it is quite possible that when the Polynesian people arrived, that there were remnants of the earlier population living there that had an oral tradition and history of much more ancient and knowledge and times of this little island. So this shows us that, in fact, there are two different designs of these moai. In this case, you have a person with what is called an aquiline nose. So you see it's very angular, very European looking, whereas Polynesian people tend to have somewhat flattened noses. And also the possible appearance of a goatee or beard. And once again, Polynesian people, if they're full-blooded, tend to have zero facial hair, or if there is some, it's just a little bit of stubble. Nothing that could make a mass like a goatee like that. And as well, we have other sites, like this is called Tongariki, and notice that one of them is wearing a red hat of some kind. And what we're starting to learn is that that likely is not a red hat or depiction of a hat, it's a depiction of the original people who may have had genetically red hair. Also, we find structures like this with holes that in some places look like they were done with drills. Now, once again, this stone is basalt and it's very hard, so you would need at least steel level technology to be able to do this kind of work. And here again, another example. In fact, on the left, there's evidence that that was a tube drill, which is something that was not really invented to carve into hard stone like this until the late 19th century AD. The civilization on Easter Island more or less collapsed around the 1770s, because I believe it was in the 1720s that Van Roggeveen was the first European to visit Easter Island, and by the time of Captain Cook's arrival in the 1770s or 1780s, disease, accidentally brought in by the Europeans, had basically wiped out that civilization. So the whole culture from the 1780s onwards actually went downhill. And this just shows you a little video of the drill holes. Only located, especially there, you see those are almost perfectly circular, and only located at a few sites on the island. So in the foreground, we see again the volcanic tuff carving, so quite soft. The figure in total would be about 8 feet tall, reasonably easy to have been made by the Polynesian people. And then these much larger figures. Some of these are made out of volcanic tuff, and other ones are made out of basalt. And once again, on some level, you can see that some of them have kind of flat noses, and others have more like what's called an aquiline nose, especially the second from the left. You see very angular nose, and then with other ones, you see a flattened nose. If that's an expression of what the people looked like, either they were very ethnically diverse, which means they came from different parts of the world. It's unlikely that this is simply an artistic expression, because if everyone was homogeneous, then you wouldn't know what someone with an aquiline nose would look like. And here we have the temple complex, and this work here in the foreground, quite simple, beach stones and smaller stones on this temple complex. This is a creation by the Polynesian people, not that complicated to do in terms of technology or resource acquisition. And then again, these giant figures, some of them 15 plus feet tall. The quarry is at least 5 miles away. We have no idea how they could have, or the Polynesians at least could have shaped them and moved them from the quarry to this location, because what would they use as rollers? There are no hard, large wooden trees located on the island. The largest trees they had were a kind of palm tree, but the material was so soft that trying to put something that would weigh 10 or 15 tons on top of log rollers would simply squish the material underneath. And once again, this is another location where you can see some quite tight-fitting stonework in contrast to the rougher work of the complex that we saw previously. And at another location, this is Anakena Beach. Once again, we see the figures with the top knots, and you can even see people to this day who wear their hair like that. It's actually traditional Polynesian to do that, especially for women with long hair. Because of the temperature and heat and humidity on Easter Island, women have a tendency to wear their hair up like that so their neck stays cool. So this most likely is a depiction of people with genetically red hair, not some kind of hat, because you don't find anything like this anywhere in Polynesia except Easter Island. And the general idea is that the Easter Island people migrated from Tahiti about 1,000 years ago. So Tahiti is thought to be the homeland of the Polynesian people. That includes the Maori people of New Zealand, the Hawaiians, and the Easter Islanders. And this is the back. And what's kind of curious is here, once again, you don't find one simple building style. We see recycling of material. And that doesn't make sense if you only have one culture involved. Because in general, a temple would be built and then expanded and expanded and expanded. Another one would be built, another one and another one. But in the construction of this back wall, we see that a head has been recycled. Right there, the two eyes. The erosion is very heavy. So this could be from another time period, possibly. And more evidence of this hard basalt construction with holes that are almost perfectly circular and likely involved some kind of level of technology. And this is a close-up of that, almost perfectly circular. If they had basalt tools, basalt trying to cut basalt, you would basically have a situation where the tool would wear down as fast as the material you're cutting. Because what we find anywhere on the planet is the tool has to be a material harder than the material you're cutting. So basalt does not cut basalt very efficiently. Basalt cuts volcanic tuff quite efficiently, but the Polynesian people did not have any kind of metal technology whatsoever. And that's what we find in Polynesia in general up until contact with the Europeans in the 18th century, because they brought with them from Europe the knowledge of iron and the knowledge of steel. And that's why iron and steel were great trade products, because the Polynesians very soon learned that that was an amazing way and efficient way to cut stone and other materials. But these are known to be from pre-contact times. And here again, at another temple complex, very tight-fitting stone in basalt. So as I said earlier, there are at least 3 or 4 locations where we find stone-on-stone contact utilizing basalt, which is not found on the island, but is presently found underwater, likely somewhere in the region of 50 or 100 feet deep. And so it's most likely that the basalt was harvested in pre-Polynesian times when the ocean level was lower than it is today, and that would be, geologically speaking, 12,000 years ago. And so these are, again, located on the outside of the quarry, and most people simply think that they are heads and necks. But what we're going to see is that these are in fact full figures. So here you see, again, one of them with an aquiline looking nose and possibly the representation of a beard, but some people distinguish this look from the quote-unquote Polynesian look. And here again, 2 more of them. If they were depicting themselves, they would depict people with more flattened noses than with this design. So I think these are the ones that date back to pre-Polynesian times, and then once the Polynesians arrived, they created many more of them, but on a much smaller scale. The big ones are the ones with the aquiline noses. And there is one that's more than 40 feet tall. Then we look in the quarry, and you can see there, you can see that one is lying facing this way, a little farther over. Here, you see the nose. And again, this area here where one has been cut out. And then the higher and higher you go, the more of them that are still in situ. And this again is an area where one had been removed from the back, and then you see one facing with its head or face looking straight up, still located in the quarry. And here again, more of them. And what we're going to see in upcoming pictures is that excavations were done starting in the 1950s, and that shows that each and every one of these, unless the head was broken off at the neck by falling over or destruction, they go all the way down into the ground. And geologist Robert Schock, who I went to the island with, believes that the soil has actually built up, that these were standing figures and that the soil built up over the course of time, and he has no problem in believing that some of these could have been constructed 12,000 plus years ago. Another one of the giant figures, its face looking upwards, unfinished in the quarry. This one is in the region of 40 to 50 feet long, which would be very difficult to do. And again, notice the aquiline type nose. And the quarry, again, many of the Moai had been cut out of this stone and moved. There's evidence that there was once a road that went all the way around the island. It's presently located about a meter underground. And so those slabs of stone, again, are believed to have been made of basalt. And basalt is not found in abundance whatsoever on the surface of the island. They actually started to uncover the road, and supposedly some of the local people decided to pry up the stones and take them for use in house construction, and so the government decided to cover it back up again. So we have no idea what is hiding underneath the surface of Easter Island. And this is at a curious spot called Ahu Te Pito Kura, which basically means the navel of the world. And according to local experts and local indigenous people, the 5 stones found in that center, the large one in the center and the 4 that are around it, are not found on Easter Island whatsoever, and their original location is unknown. So whether they were brought from Tahiti originally or whether they were brought from another part of the world is up to question. But also this area has magnetic anomalies which are inherent in the land, but no one knows what is creating that force. You can literally, at one point, turn off your car engine and your car will coast down a hill and then coast back up and over the next hill. So that's just an energetic anomaly located on the island. And it could be that in ancient times, that is how the giant stones were moved. The Polynesian people talk about a thing called mana, which is spiritual energy or life force. And they insist that the Moai figures were not pulled or dragged along the ground, but were actually moved using spiritual forces. We also have this, which is called Rongo Rongo, and it's a glyph system that is only found on Easter Island. You don't find it on Tahiti or Hawaii or any other part of Polynesia, and there's some indications that this script actually comes from the Indus Valley, as in India area, because there's a very similar type of script located there. So the complexity of the history of Easter Island could indicate, again, that it was a focal point or a place of transit for many different cultures over the course of thousands of years, including people visiting and possibly populating from the Indus Valley. Only 25 or so examples of this Rongo Rongo still exists, and nobody on the island knows how to translate it. It's quite possible that it's so ancient that they never knew what it meant. But it was an inheritance from one of the much older civilizations. This is simply quite a bizarre figure. No one knows what it represents. In some ways it looks like it has an elongated head. There is a tradition on the island that people with elongated heads lived there in pre-Polynesian times. That lives up to this very day. And so that, again, could be very much a genetic difference between the first inhabitants of Easter Island and the later Polynesian people. Because this is more of a depiction of the actual Polynesian people. So contrast this with that. Also, we do know that during Polynesian times, the Moai figures had eyes. The eye socket was made out of a red stone, and then the other area of the eye was coral. So they originally had eyes that were looking up towards the heavens. And that's a feature where after contact with Europeans, there was a lot of troubles, internal battling that happened on Easter Island. Many of the smaller ones were tumbled over, and all those that did have these eyes were damaged. So this is a reconstruction. And again, another example of the Rongo script, which you do not find in any other part of Polynesia. So we were fortunate to meet the mayor of Easter Island, and we brought with us a representation of an elongated skull of the Paracas people of the coast of Peru. Now, the Paracas people are one of my main subjects of study, and genetically we're finding out that they had elongated skulls that were natural, as in they were born that way. They had lighter colored skin, and they had genetically red hair. And so when we brought this to her and presented it to her, she said, oh, the ancient people also looked like that. So that could be very much a connection between Easter Island and the coast of Peru. A few years ago, you will all have heard of the Kon-Tiki expedition by Thor Heyerdahl. And a couple of years ago, I believe his grandson did a recreation of sailing across the Pacific on Kon-Tiki 2. And so rather than Thor Heyerdahl, where he simply wanted to see where Kon-Tiki would go, the people of Kon-Tiki 2, because they had GPS, decided to try to navigate directly from the coast of Peru to Easter Island, and they were successful in a little over a month. So that shows that in pre-European times, contact between Easter Island and the coast of Peru was possible, and that enters into the whole realm also of complex racial mixing before the time of European contact. The possibility also that those that did the very lost ancient high technology work in the highlands of Peru, like around Cusco, were the same people or related people who did the work on Easter Island. And here we see the first excavations in the 1950s by Thor Heyerdahl. So you see they dug down and they found a full body in the 1950s, and almost every single one of those Moai are also buried up to their necks. And according to geologists like Dr. Robert Schock, they believe that's the result of erosion on the island and the buildup of soil. There's a lot of rainfall on Easter Island, so you'll get lots of sloughing off of soil over the course of hundreds, if not thousands of years. So this could be an indication that the earliest constructions on Easter Island are 12,000 plus years old. And poor Thor Heyerdahl, he was not a member of academia. He strongly believed that there was migration of people across the Pacific in ancient times. One of the key things he focused on was the red hair that you find evident in ancient Peru, and also possible evidence on Easter Island. The Easter Islanders also have a tendency or an ancient tradition that say that the most ancient ancestors came from where the sun rises, or actually, sorry, from where the sun sets, or sun rises, actually both. So that means that people could have gone to Easter Island either from the west or from the east or from both. And these are current excavations going on Easter Island. You see, buried up to their nose in some cases. This is done inside the crater where the quarry is located. Unfortunately, it's not open to the public, but from what I've been told, they're still excavating to this very day and finding more and more evidence of underground buried things. And here once again, and here again, and here, this is actually the one that has the sailing ship. So you see, that is evidence, because of the buildup of soil, that could be a ship that actually arrived before the time of Van Roggeveen or other known Europeans. So there could be a very complex history on Easter Island, a little tiny place located at least 2,000 miles from any major landmass, and definitely a place of more study in the future. And when we look here at a Moai that was never completed, you see it's still attached to the bedrock. The idea that that was done using a hand tool such as that is highly unlikely. Those are more like tool marks that we see at ancient megalithic places on Egypt. So it could be an indication, actually, some cataclysmic event that happened before European and even Polynesian contact, that maybe there was some kind of cataclysmic event that happened on Easter Island, maybe at this event or series of events that happened about 12,000 years ago. And finally, an aerial view shows you the number of massive Moai figures that were never completed. These again are 20, 30, and even 40 feet in scale. The stone is relatively hard, so I believe that these are remnants of the first culture, and I believe these are remnants of lost ancient high technology.